So let's talk about some of those things, the implications, and just how to respond as a believer and how to counter some of the narratives and other things as other people are trying to discern what's going on. And they're going to give you certain perspectives.
Oh my God, this guy annoys me so much, the way he works so hard to ignore reality and live in this alternative world.
Oh yes, Chris Yoon. He's an EGOT of the right. Hardcore conspiracy theorist, hardcore MAGA, hardcore Q-Anon, hardcore Christian. In fact, his parents started a church where they hold AK-47s during the service. You know, the way God wanted.
The video I'm looking at today is Chris Yoon reacting to Donald Trump invading Venezuela and telling the audience to ignore what you see at face value, but instead use discernment and the spirit of what's happening. Let's dive in.
All right, so we have some incredible breaking news. The conference or the press conference that had happened with President Trump last night, he has talked a lot in some detail about the coming plan of what's going to happen. So let's talk about some of those things, the implications, and just how to respond as a believer and how to counter some of the narratives and other things as other people are trying to discern what's going on. And they're going to give you certain perspectives that they think is correct. But really, you have to discern, you have to be aware in the spirit of what's happening in this time right now as we're living through this.
Okay, I think when he's talking about narratives, he's talking about people presenting evidence and making arguments.
Yeah, and it's very interesting as to preface a video by saying, hey, if we're believers, we have to approach things in a different way. We have to think about things differently.
A believer in what? Donald Trump? The cult of Trump? The cult of MAGA? What is he a believer in?
Either way, let's see how strong his arguments are.
For this next season. And so be very careful when BBC and these guys say these things where they are spinning their narrative to say, look, he vowed not to do this in his second term and to stop wars, to not start them. Technically, this is not a war that he's starting with Venezuela. And this is from Marco Rubio, and I believe I'm just quoting here from possibly a phone call or something with BBC, but he's saying, speaking with several U.S. media outlets, and being on NBC, where he said, or was asked if U.S. is at war with Venezuela, and he says that that's not a war. I mean, we are at war against drug trafficking organizations. That's not a war against Venezuela. He says the seizing of boats bringing drugs towards the United States will continue. And so this is why Marco Rubio, Trump, and many others are doing things that seems like war. It seems like he's starting wars, and as the BBC is saying here from this comment, that this is, a stark reversal and all that stuff. But really, you got to look at context.
Okay. You want to start with your strongest argument. And he begins with talking about people spinning narratives and then immediately pivoting to trying to redefine terms, which is basically spinning narratives.
Yeah, and then ending on the idea that you need to look at context. Well, he's ignoring so much of what's happening, right? You have people breaking international laws, an invasion on a country, foreign leaders being arrested and taken to other countries where they're perp walked. I mean, maybe that should be some of the context we look at.
Yes, there were, a video of him antagonizing Trump and the United States to say, hey, come capture me, haha. But because he knew he couldn't stand a chance with his military and the might of the U.S. forces, that he was part of it to say that I will negotiate my own exit, or that the opposition party or people inside of his organization said, you know what, come, we'll have our guards down, take them, make this a spectacle, a show, however you will, that you can portray this to the world, that you did this. And again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that that was part of why it could have been a negotiated exit and a possible conspiracy theory.
Okay, so let's add some context. And remember, he began this video by talking about how he's going to help people counter the narratives. And so far, he's basically said, hey, Marco Rubio said this isn't war. And now he's saying, well, what if it was a negotiated exit? None of that justifies what has happened. There's a hostile takeover of natural resources, and Donald Trump is doing press conferences about it.
And because of that, of course, there are a lot of people saying, look, Trump from his own mouth is saying that he's going to allow very large corporations to exploit its oil, and he's going to run the country, as I had shown in that original clip, and people are calling it blatant colonialism. And others, including the BBC, are looking at this and saying Trump's remarks mark a reversal of what he vowed not to do in his second term in power, a pledge to be a president who would stop wars, not start them, writes some chief person. And so I want to take a quick moment to say, listen, all of the people that are looking at this and saying Trump is bad and look at what it's doing, blah, blah, blah. And you can look at this at face value and say it's bad and it's colonialism. It's a, egregious abuse of power and an extension of dictatorship and all that stuff. But you got to remember, Maduro was not the president of Venezuela. Many countries across the world, sovereign nations, and many independent sources have said that this is the case. This is Secretary Marco Rubio saying this back in July of 2025.
And so there I feel like his argument fell even flatter because he listed all of the things that to anyone's observation can see what's happened. That a superpower is invading a third world country, very much like we saw historically happen with colonialism.
And Chris himself admits that Donald Trump is exploiting the oil, all to land on his next argument that Maduro wasn't president. And again, the source is Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio, being part of Donald Trump's administration, might not be the great source for this information.
So let's hear now Chris make a case of why Maduro deserved to be arrested.
And what BBC and many others are looking at this in saying that this is bad. And again, this is part of the big narrative across the world that you have to discern, is that he's not going in there to take over and to say, you know what, we want to start wars and all of that stuff. But he's saying, as he's always been, that it's peace through strength. And so when you do actions, and of course some of it is offensive, meaning that you have to go on offense to allow defense, to allow peace, this is part of what he is doing. And it could look bad in the sense of the oil and all that, but many others, if you don't know, Venezuela is like one of the, if not like the number one or two largest oil reserve countries in the nation currently, where it is underdeveloped. And the U.S., and again, people can believe this or not, but I believe that the U.S. and the corporations, yes, there are going to be some greedy people, but they want to go in, they're going to help industrialize or develop the nation for oil production like Saudi Arabia, and hopefully bring that money back to the people and the people of Venezuela and grow and flourish that nation.
Wow, that was a lot of copium there. And I don't think there was even an argument. Yeah, he mentions that Donald Trump is the president of no new wars, but then goes on to say sometimes you got to be offensive to be defensive, and then pointing to one of the largest motivations of why you'd want to do that, the natural resources, but then goes on to make the case that Donald Trump, one of the most selfish people in the world, is going to lift up a third world country, the America First president. Oh boy, let's just see if he could land this plane.
And there's a very viral video going around where a Venezuelan man was asked his perspective, and he said, and again, this is translated to those who say that the U.S. is only interested in our oil. I ask you, what do you think the Russians and the Chinese wanted here? The recipe for arepa? And again, that's sarcasm, showing that the people of Venezuela are understanding perspective. They're understanding that they know their country. They know what's at stake. They know the perspective and the narratives, and they're trying to counter that as well to make sure that the world is educated. And so again, let's see what else is coming out of this. But the bottom line here is that we are seeing a great awakening of people that are, whether they're left and liberal, and these guys trying to defend certain things or not, or attacking Trump and others of certain things, with their own preconceived notions and biases, trying to project that onto people. But really, if you are a Venezuelan, if you are somebody that's awakened conservatively in the sense of biblical perspective, they understand oppression. They understand what has gone on in Venezuela as well as in other parts of Latin America and South America, and what needs to be done to combat some of the things, especially at the big picture level, the spiritual warfare and the product, the produce, the fruit of what's coming out of some of these countries to try to make money, which is, in this case, with the narco stuff and the drug stuff. But now, hopefully, turning to a better, more resourceful way to make money and to be prosperous, which is through oil and the exports of the stuff and the whole infrastructure behind all that.
Wait. So was he just making an argument that the people of Venezuela want to be under rule of another country? That they want to be colonized?
I mean, yeah, pretty flimsy arguments, especially when a lot of them hinge on what Marco Rubio says, like he is the authoritative source. Oh boy. But let's go through the counters that he supplied his audience with. Marco Rubio said it wasn't war. Marco Rubio said he's not president. There is the potential it could be a conspiracy theory that this was a negotiated exit. But even then, why break international law? And then finally lands on the idea that the people of Venezuela want to be colonized, and that Donald Trump is doing all of this to lift up third world countries.
And the most crazy thing is that people believe this shit.
Perfect timing. We've just arrived. Behold, Frank's bar.
Let's head inside and see if we could find this mad scientist.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom.